Hi there, my name is Joanne Sheldon. Welcome to the show. This is Pastels with Joanne. And today we're going to do an introduction to chalk pastel. Chalk pastel is the medium that I use. I'm an artist that creates realistic paintings and drawings. Pastel is a dry medium, but we do call them paintings because the finished piece is a colored picture. And so today what we're going to do is this, I have this photo here as my reference of a beautiful landscape with a really intense, beautiful looking sky. So we're going to use the pastels today. We're going to start in on the sky. We'll do a little bit of the trees and the road just to show you how pastels work. So first of all, there are two types of pastels. There's a chunk pastel and pencil pastels, and they're both chalk. So when you rub them onto your hand, you can see that they have the same effect as a chalkboard chalk would. Feels the same. And these ones are chalk as well, but they're not as soft. So they're a harder pastel. They work really well for creating fine details. So you'll see me use a lot of the pencils to create all of the fine detailed images for the trees. But we're going to use a lot of the softer chunk pastels to create the softness in the clouds and the sky. So what we'll do is I'm going to start off with showing you how the pastels work on the picture here. So what I'm using as a surface is called suede mat board, and it's actually a piece of suede that we would normally use to frame pictures. But you can use the suede material for pastels with chalk because the chalk holds on to the fibers of the suede, so it works really well with chalk. But there are other surfaces you can use to do chalk pastel paintings. So you could use, there's pastel paper, and there's also a sanded surface paper that you can use, which works really well also. I do a lot, all my stuff is realistic. So when I'm doing realistic paintings and drawings, the surface is important to create a certain look. So suede works really well when I'm doing landscapes or for wildlife paintings. I do a lot of wildlife. Suede works really well for that because it creates a softness, and you can get into the texture and really create a lot of texture with the pastels. You can use a sanded surface for portraits to create the soft look of the skin along with the really crisp details of eyes and things like that. So that works really well also. So we're going to start off with these Rembrandt chalk pastels. So these are the chunks, and Rembrandt is a really great brand to use to start off with for anybody who's interested in trying out pastels. They work really well. And so I'm going to start off with adding in the really, really bright yellows that we see in the sky. I always want to start with a really bright light color first, because that way, if some of the darker pieces of chalk happen to dust over top of where I've already placed a light color, having the light sitting there on the base of the suede ahead of time will prevent any the darker pastels sticking to the suede and changing the color. So getting this light, bright color in right off the start is always the first place I would start when I'm doing a picture where there's such an intense change of color going from light to dark. So I'm just filling in just some base color of this yellow. And what happens with pastel is there's a layering process, and you can use pastel the same way that we would use paint. So it's really quite cool because you can actually mix colors with pastel the same way that you would mix paint together to create a new color. So I'm going to add in this orange just to show you how when you add two colors together, and because it's chalk, it's soft and pliable, so it really works really well to blend. So I'm going to add a little bit more of this yellow over top of the orange now. So where the yellow and the orange are meeting up, I'm just going to layer in, and then you can use your fingers to blend. Anytime my finger fits in a space to blend, I will use my finger as a blending tool. We do have other blending tools that you can use in areas when it gets really small and fine, but for the most part, I would do that. So you can see how as I add layers of chalk in here, the more layers I get, the more blending and softness I can create with the look. So over top again, just layer after layer, kind of filling it in like that. the brightness and the intense color that we want to have creating here where the sun is setting, that's the brightest and lightest part of our painting. So we really do want to focus on making sure that this area is really light and really bright. So I'm going to add make sure I add quite a few layers of chalk into that area so that we can create that beautiful, beautiful bright effect that the sky has happening here in this sunset. So I'm going to add just layering in a few more layers of this bright yellow. And then you always want to keep, when you're doing photorealism, you always want to create a painting that, you know, has really, really close, it's very close to what's happening in the photo. And so having the photo really close to your painting is the best way to do it, so that you can just look back and forth really quickly. Because if your photo is far away, we tend to kind of forget what we've seen, and it's not as easy to transfer those details. So keep your photo close at hand. So I'm going to take some white and I'm going to blend it into this yellow area right at the base of the road where the sun is just peeking up in there, because that's the very, very brightest spot, just right in that area right there where that sun is peeking through. I don't want it to be white, I just want it to be a really, really bright yellow. So I'm just blending the white in with that bright yellow so that we've got one spot that's just a little bit brighter than all the rest. And so I'm going to continue in, I'm just going to add some more layers. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move into, I would normally continue on into filling in all of the lighter areas wherever I see that yellow peeking through. I'm going to add all kinds of layers in there with the chalk. So the suede will take lots and lots of layers. So it's really great that way, because if you make a mistake or need to do a correction or change the color in any way, you can actually go right over top of the pastel that you already laid down, and it's really easy to layer over top and fix mistakes and things like that as well. So it's a fairly forgiving medium. And that's great, because you can continue to make changes and it's not a big deal if you make a mistake or you notice that you need to make a change somewhere. So I add those layers in, and now I'm going to move into just showing you where the change of color happens in here. So I'm going to move into some darker oranges to create this cloud that's happening here. So the cloud is kind of sort of a reddy orange, a little bit of a brown tone kind of in there as well. I would say it's kind of more purpley. But I'm going to start off with what's going to look, when I first place it onto the canvas, it's going to look really, really bright. But that's okay, because we do want to have a really, really intense color sitting on the suede to create this effect. So it's a layered process. So you're going to start out with this really bright reddy orange color, and that's what I'm going to put as the base for the cloud. So I'm going to put that in there. And when you're creating realism, you want to make sure that the layering process is accurate. And what I mean by that is, when something is further away, you want to have that color or that section painted on your canvas first. And then when you have something that's closer to you, so for example, in this case, it's the cloud, so the sky is in behind and the cloud is in front, you want to make sure that you actually have a physical overlap of the chalk. So where the orange meets up with the yellow, I'm actually going to physically go right over top of the yellow so that there is an actual overlap happening there. And that just is it's a subtle effect that really makes a big difference in realism, so that you can actually see that it makes it look like the clouds are in front of the sky. So I've got that base, really bright base of color, so you can see when you compare it to here, it's a lot brighter than the photo. So I'm going to now add in some of the other colors to kind of tone it down a little bit. But having that bright base will really make the color very rich when you're finished. So you could go straight into this color that I'm using right now and start with that, because it is really close to the color that's on the canvas. But having that bright color underneath is really going to enrich the color and make it look a lot more intense. It's just a little bit of an extra pop of color that has more of an effect. It's not as flat when you do a layering process of a few different colors in there. So again, I'm going to use my finger I have a little bit of yellow on my finger from blending in the sky down here, but that's okay. Because it's lighter, it's not going to affect the blending of it, and there wasn't much on my finger. So I'm just going to blend that in together. And I don't know if you can see this or not, but this dusting that I was talking about before is starting to happen, it's just part of working with pastel. I would just blow it off. So I'm just going to do a little blow like that, and it just pops right off. So if you can just kind of keep that dusting off of the lighter parts of the suede, it'll keep that yellow looking nice and bright, but we'll have to go back later and touch that up again anyway. So I'm going to continue to go in, and I'm going to add a few more layers of this, and then I'm going to just work a little bit more specifically in this cloud area to show you how you can create that cloud effect. So I'm just adding in another layer. So again, the more layers that you add of chalk, the easier it is to blend and move the chalk around so that you can mix colors together to create a new color, just like you would with paint. And so I'm blending that together. Right now it's all very solid. It's one solid color, just like the yellow part of the sky is, but we don't want that with the cloud. With the clouds, we want it to be textured. So to create that textured look, now we get to go back in and start really playing around with the shapes. And so this is where the pencils will come in handy to create some of these really specific little shapes that are happening inside the cloud. So when I work on something like this, I would look really carefully at the shapes that I see happening in here to create the look that I see. So for example, in this area right in here, what I see happening is the really bright yellow of the sky kind of coming into the cloud a little bit. And so there's little bits of dark pieces of the cloud that are coming up over top. So I'm going to find my pencils that have the same, I match. So whenever I'm starting a new piece, I pull out pencils that have the same color as the chunk chalks do, so that I can work with basically the same color. So this really light yellow, I've got this one that's the same. And this one is going to be a really close color to help fill in the clouds details. So I'm going to put down some of these chunks, and we're going to go in with these with the pencils. So the pencils are a harder pastel, as I mentioned before, and so they don't go on as soft. The chunks are quite soft, so when they go on, it's softer, it's easier to blend. It gives more intense color. You can get really bright brights and really dark darks, really intense color with chunks. The pencils are harder, but they work really, really well for creating fine detail. You can also use them to help move around some of the softer chunks that you already have on your suede. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start creating this look. We're going to get into a really fine area right in here so you can kind of see what we do to create the look of these clouds with some of that finer detail. So I'm just going to add a little bit more of a layer in here. And then I'm going to take a look and see what I see happening in here. So I'm going to just go into the cloud area in that same area where I'm looking on the photo. And I'm going to add some of these little shapes that we see happening. So some of these pencils actually have a fair amount of pigment too. And they are a lot softer than they seem. So you can really get some fairly good color out of them. So I'm just kind of going in and out, creating some of the softness of that cloud effect. And then what I do is I'll go back in with the yellow color. Now I'm wiping the tip of this pencil off because when I had used it before, it was up against this darker brownish color, and it got the tip of it dark. And so if you want to go into a light area, you want to make sure that your pencil or your chunk doesn't have any dark chalk sitting on top of it. Otherwise it'll change the color where you want it to be light. So I'm just going to go back in with this, and that just helps me kind of crispen up and pull in some of these edges to just create some of that fine detail for those clouds. Now I can see that the color is slightly different in the area where I went in with this pencil, so I'm going to pick a brighter orange again and a lighter one, and I'm going to blend those in to help match that color up a little bit more. And so when you do use a combination of pencils and chunks, which is what I would recommend for creating a really beautiful piece, you want to layer in the pencils everywhere in that section that you're applying it so that it doesn't look different when you've got that finished product. So I'm going to take this brown one again and I'm going to blend that, some of that down into the main area of the clouds, like that. So as we move up into the different parts of the sky in here, the colors change. There's a gradation of yellow to orange to almost red. And so that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to work on that a little bit just to show you how you can kind of continue to layer in and change the color gradually going from yellow to orange as we move this way. So I'm going to take the yellow chunk again, and I just want to see how far does this yellow actually go. And so it takes a little bit of practice with color to kind of just see what you can see. So I always like to just point out where I see it. So I see yellow traveling in behind these trees all the way, pretty much all the way through. And the reason for that is because the sun is setting. And so the brightness that we see at the horizon here is also happening in behind these trees. So that yellow area, we're going to bring that down into the tree line all the way down over to here, even though we don't really see much of it happening in here, but it is peeking through behind the trees in this side. Also see it happening up, kind of up into here. We see a little bit of that yellow up in here as well. So there's a lot of yellow in this painting that really is subtle. And so you want to make sure you have that as the base, because it's the lightest and the brightest. So always want to have that one on there first, and then you're going to take the other colors and layer them in over top where you need them to be. So I'm going to pull this yellow down. So I want you to take a look here. So I've got this tree line that I've got marked in, so I know where the edges of the trees are going to be. But I'm actually going to go right over top of that, where that tree line is marked out, and blend that yellow down into the tree line. So I'm literally going right over top, but I'm not going that hard with it, so that later when I want to go and put these trees back in, I can still see that little edge that I have. So that gives me the guide as to where I'm going to place in these trees later on. But I do want to have the yellow in behind so that when I go to fill in the leaves of the trees, that yellow will already be peeking through in behind. So the dark leaves will sit in, or just fill in right over top. And that makes it look really natural, rather than having to try and do the dark and the light side by side at the same time. So the layering process is kind of an important one with pastel, and it's actually a really fun part of doing pastel paintings, because you get to do a lot of blending and mixing around of color. That's one of the things that I really like about pastel. You get to do mixing and layering and blending with a dry medium, which is what most people would do with acrylic paint. But this time you kind of get to go in there and get really hands-on and mix with your fingers. It's lots of fun. So I've got a layer of yellow traveling across here. I'm going to bring it up just a little bit higher. And this is a fairly light base, and the reason I know that, you can see I had some orange on my finger there. I picked it up on the thing, but that's okay because we are going to layer some different colors in. You can still see the suede underneath this layer of yellow here and there. So this suede that I've chosen is a really light color. You can get suede in many different colors. And so I'll be doing other paintings in the future that will have a different color suede, so that you can see the color of the suede that you choose can really change the effect of the painting, which is kind of cool too. So when you don't have enough layers of pastel on your suede, it will look uneven. So you can see the difference from here to here, where we only have one layer of pastel, and here I've got a couple layers of pastel. You can see that there really isn't any areas where the suede is sort of showing through in this section because I've got probably three or four layers in here now. Over here with just the one layer, there's little spots where it looks kind of like that lightish, light beige color kind of coming through. And so that tells us that you definitely have to, we're definitely going to need to put in more layers. But because we're putting in other colors besides the yellow, it's not crucial that it be totally filled in with lots of layers of yellow. So that first layer will be yellow, and I'm going to go in with, I'm going to set aside my pencils again, and we're going to go in with some of these other colors to change the color of the sky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to gradually change the color. It goes from really bright yellow right in here, and then that yellow is still there, but it's already subtly changed on this side of the cloud where it's starting to turn a little bit orange. So I'm going to use these two colors to change the color as we move this way. And so I know that the change is going to happen where the really brightest section is right in here and right in here. Everything else on the side of this cloud going this way needs to have a little bit of orange blended into it because it is not as bright as this section is right in here. So I'm just going to outline this cloud a little bit. We'll come back in and fill that in a little bit later. But I want to just get that edge in here so I know where the color will change. So we know our color change is going to happen on this side of the cloud. I'm creating a little edge there just so I know where it is. And then I know that is my starting point to start creating that change. There's also a little edge here. So the reason for the change in the color is partly the atmosphere. So with the sunset, it changes as the sky changes as it moves upwards. But also there's just this beautiful layering of cloud that's really fine as it gets down into this area. So there's quite a few things that are happening here in terms of color. So right in here, there is a little bit of a darker edge of a cloud, and then it gets really bright again. That's happening right in here. And so I'm going to just create this little edge right in here. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to know where I need to keep this section really bright. So this section right in here is just as bright as it is below the clouds closest to the sun. But it's just a tiny little section. So I'm just going to mark it off by outlining it right now so that I know that when I start blending in some of the oranges, I will leave this so that it stays the bright yellow. So that's just kind of a guide for me for later. So now I'm going to start blending in the colors. So I'm going to start with this one. It's the closest to the yellow. It's a really soft orange, orangey yellow kind of type color. And I'm going to start with that, and I'm going to blend it right up to the edge of this cloud. Now, if the color from the cloud kind of overlaps into where the sky is, that's okay, because we're going to do a lot of layering back and forth of this section. And then once I have the sky the way I want it in terms of color, then I'm going to go back in and bring this cloud in over top anyway. So if there's a little bit of kind of messiness that happens when I blend in here, that's okay, because we are going to go back in and go over top of that later. So I'm just going to add this color in. So let's just take a look at this now. I've put this orange color in right over top of the yellow, and I'm going to just blend it in with my finger. Once I have it mixed in, it's changing the color just like you would when you mix paint. And then I'm going to compare it to my photo and see how it looks. So that's why having your photo really close is important, because you can make really quick reference checks to see where we're at. So there are some areas where I think I'm really close, but there are also some areas where I think the yellow needs to come back in and be a little bit brighter. So I'm going to go back to my bright yellow right in here, just along this baseline right in here, and I'm just going to add some yellow back in, and you'll see that there's a subtle change, and it'll lighten it back up again. And then just blend it in with your finger. And so there's a very subtle change just in this area right in here, where it goes from really a pale orange to a slightly darker one. And again, the more layers of pastel you have on the suede, when you're trying to create this type of effect, the better it will work. The look of the clouds and the softness that we're trying to create is really, really great with pastel. It works really, really well, but it only works if you have enough pastel on the suede so that you can blend them together. So if I didn't have enough pastel and if I tried to blend that orange in, I'm going to do it just for an example. So if I tried to blend my orange in over here, where I have a really thin layer of pastel, so thin that I can still see the suede underneath, and I add this color in over top, hoping to blend them together. If there's not enough suede, or pardon me, not enough pastel, and I try to blend it, find a clean finger, so I'm going to try and blend that together. And when I look closely at this, I can see that it's not smooth at all. There's the yellow and the orange are kind of, it almost looks like scribbling because there isn't enough pastel for me to mix the two together so it looks smooth. But where I've added 3, 4, 5 layers of pastel over here, it's really nice and soft. And the color is all one, which is what we're trying to do right now. Because what we're trying to do is we want to get that really soft, continuous color that a sky has. So we don't want there to be any crisp edges in this part. We're going to pull crisp edges in over top when we put the clouds back in. So right now we're working on sky, so we want it to be really smooth. All right, so we're just blending out that sky. And when we come back next time, I'm going to show you how to continue finishing off the sky. We're going to work on trees and this really cool road that we have in the front. So hope to see you next time. Thank you for joining us. This is Joanne with Pastels by Joanne, and would really look forward to seeing you next time.